Hi everyone, my name is Kavya Sharma and I welcome you all to my YouTube channel. I hope all of you guys are doing good. I hope all of you guys are keeping safe. This is the need of the hour to be there for each other and to take care of each other. Alright, with this we are going to begin today's video, and this is going to be a special video because I'm going to talk about books. I'm going to talk about 10 classic books that are my absolute favorite. So for those of you who do not know, I did my English literature from Delhi University, and then I did my masters in creative writing from University of Nottingham, and I have read tons and tons of books all throughout my life, even as a child, even without these courses. So books are really special to me, and I thought, why not share my set of favorite books with you all, and maybe give you some book suggestions if you haven't already read these 10 classic book suggestions. Now let me be very clear, I have read more classic books and I have a lot more favorites, so I might come up with more videos sharing more about my other favorite books, but today it will be these 10 that I'm going to talk about. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this video gives you some good book suggestions that you can definitely read, and they are beautiful. Alright, the first book that I have in my hand is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And I read this book while I was doing my English lit, my graduation, and it's not a heavy book. It has some more articles in it to read, reference articles. That is why it looks this fat. But then otherwise, it's not that heavy a book. It's just 120 pages, and it's beautiful book. It starts with a very beautiful beginning line. Mrs. Dalloway decided to buy herself some flowers today, and I think that line just got me in right from the very beginning, because it was like, okay, why would Mrs. Dalloway buy herself flowers? Who buys themselves flowers on their own? So it created that sense of curiosity within me. It's amazing. It's hardly 120, 125 pages. It also talks about post-war trauma. It talks about a desperate housewife who's maybe looking out and, wanting some love. And this is, of course, the story of Mrs. Dalloway, and there is another story going simultaneously with it, but I'm not going to reveal much about it. This is a must read. Virginia Woolf can do wonders with the whole idea of stream of consciousness. I think I have read stream of consciousness in a lot of books, but the way Virginia Woolf does it is what I think is the best way. And just getting into your character's head and bringing out their stories more intricately, more deeply, more beautifully. You have to read Mrs. Dalloway if you're someone who's into like um, sad, tragic, deep, more realistically rooted stories. This is the book for you. All right. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now I'm sure this is one book that a lot of you might have already read, or you might have at least heard of it, because we do give a lot of Frankenstein references in the literary field and the literary industry. This is the book for you if you're looking for something supernatural, if you're looking for a good book of goodness over evil, of how your own evil, your own wrongdoings can ultimately end up to your own destruction. Mary Shelley is beautiful with her descriptions of Frankenstein. The only thing I'm going to give this away is that Frankenstein, of course, is the main protagonist. For me personally, is what I thought. And of course, there has to be a creator. It's the whole idea of what the creator ends up creating, and how the creation itself leads to the destruction of the creator. And I know to some people this might sound gibberish if you haven't really read it or heard about it, but you have to definitely read this book because it's so beautifully written. And yet again, I read it when I was in 11th or 12th, but I reread it when I was in my undergrad because it was prescribed in my course. And I think this is one book that has stayed with me for a very, very long time. So Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Alright, so the next book that I'm going to talk about is Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift. This is what it looks like. Right, so there is an interesting personal story around this book. The first time I got to know this book, I was very young. I was like a child. I was in 6th or 7th standard, and I read it and I hated this book and I did not understand it one bit. It seemed like a children's story, but a much complicated version of a children's story, and I just did not understand this book one bit. But then again, when I was doing my graduation, we had this book prescribed in our course, and I remember the moment I saw it, I'm like, okay, that's just one bad book that there was, and I read it back in my childhood, and I did not enjoy it. But of course, I had to reread it because it was in my course. And when I read it in graduation at a much matured stage, when I was grown up, when I had read a lot of books by then, and I had a good amount of knowledge on how difficult books are read and how easy books are read, I believe Gulliver's Travel is a difficult book to read, but it is so much, it's so meaningful. It has so much more than just the writing that you see or the visual impact that Jonathan Swift tries to create through this book. I think this book is very visual in its approach. Yet again, the detailing, especially the imagination and visualistic detailing, is amazing in this book. You're going to learn it for, I feel it's a very lesson oriented book. Like, you're going to learn a lot of life lessons per se through this book about, the moments of your life, as to how you have to like enjoy it every step of life, and how you might think of a bigger picture, but then you come back and you realize how the smaller things matter the most. And I personally feel, because I have a lot of friends who have read this book, and each one of them have taken a different vibe and a different feel from it. So I think this is one book wherein each person might have a different opinion on it. I'm not sure how liked, how disliked it is, but for me this is a difficult book. This was not easy to understand, and it's so meaningful. It's so deeply rooted, like in its approach. It's childish in that sense, but then it has much more to that than just being childish. It's amazingly written, and you should definitely go ahead and check this one out. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is the Odyssey by Homer. This is how it looks. One word for this book has to be grand, grand, grand. This book is like the Indian Mahabharata. It's, of course, there are parts and there are pre-books and post-books that define the whole story to detail and depths. It is full of details, full of war, tragedies, love, gods. It's grand in its approach. It's so detailed. You'll have so many subplots, so many interesting subplots to look forward to. But of course, there's a main story that catches your attention to its fullest. I mean, if you haven't read this, you have to read it, because if you're into the kind of books that are very grand in their approach, that are very big pictured in their approach, and creating a very warlike situation, this is definitely one of my favorite classics. I read it long time back. Honestly, I myself have forgotten the story bitten here and there, but then I think I'm going to go back and reread it, because I remember I thoroughly enjoyed it when I read it the first time. So, Homer's Odyssey. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Of course, I've read other books by Charles Dickens also, but I don't know why somehow this one stuck with me the most. I do take up a lot of creative writing batches, for various organizations, and this is one book that I do keep in reference This book is based on the industrial era, about the changes, about the setting changes, the character changes, the mindset changes that happened in the industrial era. And even though it's a fictional book, it feels like it's absolutely real. I think one character that I felt Charles Dickens created very well and I hated the most was Mr. Bounderby, and he's the part of this book. Um, Yet again, the detailing, the tragedies, the inner conflict one person faces when times change, when big leaps happen. This is what Hard Times cover. I think the detail of the kind of destruction and the kind of downhill thing that industrial era brought with it. Of course, everything has its pros and cons, but the cons is what we have to focus on in this book, and that's why Hard Times, I guess, the title. And yes, it's a book of tragedy, I would say. And personally, I think I have a thing for books with tragedies. I think majority of the books that I'm going to talk about here are not happy books. They're actually sad and tragedy books. So this is also something that will fall into this category. If you are interested in something wherein you will get to know more about the industrial era, about how things changed, about the whole setting and vivid descriptions and inner conflict of how things that we go through, Hard Times is the book for you. All right, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is what it looks like. All right, again, this is one book that I would say falls in a little difficult category for me. Some people might find it easy to read, but back when I read it, it was a little difficult for me to understand. It was tough. I think I reread this book right after I read it the first time, so it was a continuous rereading because I wanted to understand this much better than I did the first time. Deep, too deep, detailing, lovely details. It's not a long full-fledged book. This book has a lot of articles also. That is why it's appearing this thick, but it's a short book. Kurds is a character that I felt came out really well in this book. It's all about, I mean, I think the title itself can suggest Heart of Darkness. It's all about getting rid of that darkness in our lives, inside us, in our vision around us. And like it has many-fold darkness, as a word has many-fold meanings within this book, and it comes out through the story really well. I think one line that really stuck with me here was his end was in every way worthy of his life. I think that's a very deep line, and it stuck with me for a long time. That's why I'd opened the page. Heart of Darkness is for someone who wants to understand the idea of consciousness, because it deals with that a lot. I think the characters are constantly struggling within their own heads, within their own minds. You should definitely be reading this book. It's a beautiful book to read. Alright, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of it, have read it, but it has to be in the list of my favorite classic books. Jane Eyre is beautiful, is very realistic, it's very raw. The character growth, the character description is beautiful. I think Jane and Mr. Rochester have to be, one of my favorite characters in the literary field. They come out so well, their character graph, their personal stories, their personal tragedies, and yet the two characters falling in love and sustaining and being with each other without any malice, actually coming to terms to respecting each other and finding that stronghold and bond that eventually they live with is beautifully described. I think it is one of my favorite romance books as well, but it is just not romance that this book holds. I would also say it's a feminist fiction in its own sense, because Jane's journey from an orphan, a child who was mistreated, to someone who's grown so much, who's earned, who has her own wealth, who falls in love, who pursues it to a good extent, who has a lot of self-respect, is amazing in this book. So anyone who's into good, strong romance books and feminist fiction should definitely be reading Jane Eyre. It's a heavy book. This one is a big book, but let me assure you that it's totally worth it. You should be reading Charlotte Bronte. I think she is one of my favorite authors. All right, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Again, Gustav Flaubert, amazing with his details, amazing with his description of female characters. So, of course, I think the name itself suggests that the main character of this book is Madame Bovary. Um, I think what really struck with me about this book is how desperate the woman has been shown to be to be able to feel the love that she deserves. I think she's just constantly in search of undying, terrible love and someone who can love her so madly, so badly that no amount of efforts or energy any man puts in, she's satisfied. I think it's that utter need to be hopeless in love. This is what Madame Bovary describes. It's a beautiful story. Sometimes you end up feeling really frustrated. Sometimes you end up being angry with Madame Bovary. But sometimes you really end up sympathizing as well, because somewhere or the other, all of us inside are very hopeless in our own nature. That's what I personally feel. And that hopelessness, that desperation comes out really well in this book. I read this when I was in my undergrad. A lot of people found this book boring, but somehow, I don't know, I have a thing for boring books as well. I think they are boring because people are not interested in that detailed books. While personally, I really enjoy reading detailed books. Detailed in terms of anything, in terms of emotion, expression, setting, character description, anything. And Madame Bovary falls right in there. All right. The second last book that I'm going to talk about is Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This is what it looks like. I don't know, the cover really just gave me a very serious kind of vibe. It's a beautiful book, yet again with detailing, with characters, with minor stories, with subplots, with the whole idea of living and growing and a journey throughout life. I'm not going to give away much about this book because it is a very detailed book. It has a lot of storylines in there, and the main plot itself, it's so engaging, so involving. Uh, I think this will definitely never bore you. It's such an interesting book to read, and it has all kinds of emotions that you can expect out of a book. It has that sense of pride, that sense of love, and all the major emotions that we all feel: arrogance, happiness, sadness, everything. This book is a mixture and package of everything. It's not that fat. I mean, I personally feel it's not, but it's a cute little book and very meaningful, very deep. You should definitely check this one out. All right, the last book that I have in my list of 10 amazing classic book, my favorite 10 classic book, is Untouchable by Mulk Anand. This is what it looks like. So this is one book that came at a much later stage in my life, and I feel that it should have come much before than I read it. Very hard hitting. It will leave you feeling very sad, very terrible inside of the reality that there was, the reality that still there is on the caste system, on the ill treatment based on the caste system that happened back then also and that are still happening. I think it's a very reality rooted book. It's not a thick book, but the issue and the things that it captures, the message that it wants to give, and the reality that it wants to represent is very hard hitting. It's true, and that's what makes it more sad. That is exactly what makes it more terrible to read. I think this is a very hard read, not in terms of the difficulty of language or any such thing, but in terms of the fact as to how real this is and how sad it is that this happened. So I think this one you should definitely be reading to get more insight and more knowledge on the whole idea of caste system. It's fictional, and yet it will definitely not feel like fiction to you. So these were my 10 suggestions, 10 classic book suggestions. These are my absolute favorites. If you haven't read any of this, you should be reading them. They are interesting. They are very detailed. The character growths and descriptions are wonderful. The storylines are beautiful. The plot lines, the narration, I think everything just falls into place. These are my book suggestions to you. If you enjoyed them, and if you have any other books that you would like to read and suggest to those who are viewing this video, please mention them in the comments so that we can have a beautiful exchange of amazing book options and ideas to read, and that would be really helpful. Take care until next video, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.